Nathan Whitmore handed his wife divorce papers on her 42nd birthday in front of their family, their friends, and every executive who had ever shaken his hand. He smiled while he did it. He actually smiled. And when Emily took that envelope, unfolded those papers, and looked up at the room full of people watching her, she smiled back. That was the moment Nathan realized he had made the worst mistake of his life. Drop your city in the comments right now so I can see how far this story has traveled, and don't go anywhere because what Emily did next will stay with you long after this video ends. Subscribe and hit the bell so you don't miss a single moment. The morning of Emily Parker's 42nd birthday started the way most important mornings do, quietly with no warning at all. She woke up before the alarm the way she always did, even on weekends, even on holidays. 20 years of marriage had not changed that habit. 20 years of managing a household, raising children, and quietly steering a company from the shadows had built her into a woman who did not sleep in, who did not wait for things to happen to her, who did not need a calendar reminder to know that something big was coming. She just felt it. She had been feeling it for weeks, actually. A change in the air, a shift in the way Nathan spoke to her, or rather the way he stopped speaking to her in anything more than monosyllables and calendar confirmations. She had noticed the late evenings that stretched longer than they used to. She had noticed the way his phone now traveled with him from room to room, screen always angled away. She had noticed 100 small things that most wives would have confronted long before now. Emily was not most wives. She was the kind of woman who watched and waited and gathered information the way a surgeon gathers tools before an operation, quietly, methodically, never letting her hand tremble. So on the morning of her birthday, when she came downstairs and found Nathan already dressed in his best suit, she did not ask why. She just set the coffee to brew, and she watched him from the corner of her eye, and she waited. "You look nice," she said. Nathan adjusted his cufflinks without looking at her. "We have the party tonight. I wanted to look the part." "You always do," Emily said. There was no warmth in those 3 words, but there was truth. Nathan Whitmore had always known how to look the part. It was perhaps the one thing he had genuinely mastered on his own. The party had been planned for weeks. It was supposed to be a celebration, a birthday gathering at the Whitmore family estate in Seattle, the kind of event that Nathan's assistant had arranged with military precision. 50 guests, catered dinner, a live string quartet in the East Room. Emily had been told it was a surprise, though of course she had known about every detail from the moment the first deposit was made. That was another habit she had developed over 20 years. She always knew. What she had not known, what even her most carefully laid instincts had not fully prepared her for, was what Nathan had planned to say when the evening reached its center. She found out at 7:43 in the evening. She had been laughing with her college friend Diane by the window when she felt the shift in the room. It was subtle at first, the way a crowd noise drops half a decibel before something important happens, the way people unconsciously orient their bodies toward a focal point before they even know there is one. Nathan had moved to the center of the room. He had a glass of champagne in his hand, and there was something about the way he was holding it too loose, too casual, that made Emily's stomach tighten. She had seen Nathan hold a glass at 100 parties. She knew the difference between celebratory and performative. This was performative. "If I could have everyone's attention," Nathan said. The string quartet stopped. The room quieted. Emily smiled and turned toward her husband, the way a wife of 20 years smiles at a birthday toast, the way a woman who has learned to mask everything she feels behind a pleasant and unreadable expression turns to face the room. Nathan smiled back, and then he said something that made the entire room hold its breath. "I've been thinking a lot about honesty lately." Nathan began, his voice carrying the particular warmth of a man who has rehearsed this speech in the mirror. "About how rarely we actually tell the truth to the people around us. About how much easier it is to just keep the peace, go through the motions, pretend." There was a small, uncertain laugh from somewhere in the crowd. Emily did not laugh. She watched him. "Emily and I have been married for 20 years, Nathan continued, and now his voice shifted, dropped lower, took on that particular quality that Emily recognized as his closing a deal voice, the voice he used in boardrooms when he wanted people to believe something that was not entirely true. 20 years is a long time, and I think we've both been pretending for most of it." The room was no longer uncertain. The room was very, very still. Diane touched Emily's arm. Emily did not move. Nathan reached into the inside pocket of his jacket. He pulled out an envelope. It was cream-colored. It had a small gold seal at the corner. It was the kind of envelope that looked expensive, that looked intentional, that looked like it had been chosen very carefully to deliver something that would hurt. He crossed the room toward Emily. He held the envelope out. "Happy birthday, Emily," he said. "I think we've waited long enough." The room watched Emily take the envelope. The room watched Emily open it, slide out the papers, unfold them slowly and completely, and look down at the neatly typed words that said in the cold and legal language of the state of Washington that her husband of 20 years wished to dissolve their marriage. Divorce papers, on her birthday, in front of 50 people. The silence in the room was the kind that presses against your ears. 3 people near the back had gone so still they looked like photographs of themselves. Nathan's father, Robert Whitmore, who was seated at the long table near the window, had put down his fork. His face was the color of old concrete. He had not known. Emily could see that clearly. Robert had not known what his son was going to do tonight. And then Nathan spoke again because apparently the papers were not enough. "I've spent 20 years living in your shadow, Emily," he said. And now the warmth was gone from his voice, entirely replaced by something that might have been relief, or might have been cruelty, dressed up as relief. "I've worked myself to the bone building something, and every time I try to take credit for what I've built, someone reminds me that it was your money, your strategy, your connections. I'm done. I want credit for my own life. I want to live my own life. And I think that's something everyone in this room deserves to hear." Diane made a sound next to Emily. A small, sharp sound, the kind of sound a person makes when they are watching an accident happen and cannot stop it. Emily looked up from the papers. She looked at Nathan, and she smiled. It was not the smile of a woman who was hiding her devastation. It was not the thin, brittle smile of a woman trying not to cry in public. It was a calm, unhurried, almost gentle smile, the kind of smile that belongs to a person who has already finished the chapter that everyone else is still trying to read. She folded the papers. She placed them back in the envelope. She held the envelope in both hands, looked at it for exactly 1 moment, and then she looked back at Nathan. "Thank you," she said. Those 2 words landed in the room like stones dropped into still water. The ripples went out in every direction. Nathan blinked. It was a micro-expression, the kind of thing that only someone who knew his face as well as Emily did would catch, but it was there. He had expected tears. He had expected anger. He had prepared himself for a scene, and he had been willing to weather it, willing to stand there in front of 50 witnesses and absorb whatever she threw at him, because he had believed that a scene would prove his point, would prove that she was emotional and unstable, and that leaving her was the rational decision. What he had not prepared for was gratitude. "You've given me exactly what I needed," Emily said quietly. And before Nathan could find the words to respond, Emily turned to the room. She was still smiling, and now she spoke clearly, loud enough for every person in that space to hear, unhurried and steady, the voice of a woman who has been waiting for exactly this moment for a very long time. "I'd like to ask everyone to stay," she said. "I have a few things I'd like to share with you all as well. A birthday is a good time for honesty, I think. Nathan's right about that much." She turned to the tall, silver-haired man near the back of the room. Emily nodded to him once. The man nodded back and opened the leather briefcase at his feet. His name was Gerald Stafford. He was one of the most respected corporate attorneys in the Pacific Northwest. He had not been on the original guest list. He had been on Emily's guest list, the one Nathan didn't know existed. The screen at the back of the room, the one that had been set up ostensibly to display a birthday photo slideshow, lit up. And Emily Parker began to tell the truth. But first, let us go back. Because to understand what Emily revealed that night, you have to understand what she had quietly built over the course of 20 years, what she had sacrificed, what she had protected, and what she had been forced to conceal from the very man she had chosen to build a life with. Nathan Whitmore had met Emily Carson in the late 1990s at a regional business conference in Portland. He was 28 years old, newly appointed to a junior executive role at his father's struggling technology consulting firm, and brimming with the particular confidence of a man who has inherited his position and not yet fully reckoned with that fact. Emily was 26, had just completed her MBA with honors, and had come to the conference as a guest speaker on financial restructuring. She was by most accounts the most compelling voice in the room that day. Nathan had found her after her session. He had told her she was brilliant. Emily had thanked him politely and gone back to reviewing her notes. He had found her again at dinner. He had made her laugh. And Emily, who was brilliant in 100 professional ways, but who had never quite learned to be suspicious of charm when it came with good intentions attached, had let him. She had let him pursue her over the next several months, had let herself fall for the version of Nathan Whitmore that existed before success, confirmed his worst tendencies, the version that was energetic and funny and full of grand plans, and who looked at her like she was the most interesting person in any room they shared. They were married within 2 years. The early years of their marriage were good, in the way that early years often are when two driven people are still working toward the same goal. Nathan ran the operational side of the firm. Emily ran the strategic side. It was not publicly called a partnership. Nathan's name was on the door. Nathan was Robert Whitmore's son. Nathan was the one who stood up at the industry events and gave speeches about vision and innovation and where the future of technology consulting was headed. Emily was in the room when those speeches were written. Usually she was the one who wrote them. This did not bother her at the time. She had a particular philosophy about credit, that credit was a form of currency, and that sometimes it was strategically smarter to let someone else hold the currency while you held the actual assets. She had learned this from her mother, a quiet and formidable woman who had run the Carson family business from behind the title of Chief Financial Officer, while her brother held the CEO role and got his photograph in every industry magazine. The family had prospered. Her mother had been at peace with that arrangement. Emily had believed she would be too. She was wrong, but she did not know that yet. The first major crisis came 4 years into their marriage when Whitmore Consulting came within 90 days of collapse. The tech bubble had rattled everything. Contracts evaporated. 3 of their largest clients went under. The bank called in a loan that Nathan had taken out without Emily's full knowledge, a loan with terms that were, to put it charitably, aggressively optimistic. The company was hemorrhaging money at a rate that would have destroyed it within a quarter. Nathan panicked. He did not tell Emily the full extent of the crisis at first. He told her that things were tight, that they needed to make some adjustments, that he had it under control. He used that phrase a great deal during that period. I have it under control. Emily had heard it enough times in enough context to understand that it was usually a sentence that meant the opposite of what it said. She started looking at the books herself. What she found was worse than tight. What she found was a company that was structurally compromised with liabilities that outpaced its assets by a margin that made her sit very still at her desk for a long time before she did anything else. Then she picked up the phone and called her attorney. Emily's mother had passed away the previous year and left her a substantial inheritance, not a fortune by the standards of the very wealthy, but a significant sum carefully invested, the product of a lifetime of disciplined financial management. Emily had been keeping it separate, invested and growing in her own name. She had not touched it. She had thought of it as security, as the foundation of something she would build for herself someday. She liquidated a substantial portion of it and injected it into Whitmore Consulting. She did not announce it. She did not frame it as a rescue. She structured it with her attorney's help as a series of private loans and equity adjustments that shored up the company's balance sheet without making Nathan's panic public. She renegotiated 2 of their key contracts herself, calling in favors from people she had cultivated through years of conference attendance and professional networking relationships Nathan had always somewhat dismissed as Emily's hobby. Within 3 months, the company was stable. Within a year, it was growing again. Nathan knew she had helped. He thanked her. He told her she was a lifesaver. He brought her roses and took her to dinner and was, for a period of several months, genuinely, warmly grateful. And then something shifted. It was not a single moment. It was a gradual process, the way erosion works slowly and perceptibly, until one day you look at a cliff face and realize that something fundamental has changed shape. As the company recovered and then thrived, Nathan began to reframe the story of that recovery in his own mind. He had been the one who had steady hands during the crisis. He had been the one who made the tough decisions. He had restructured the team, he had pursued new markets, he had pushed through the difficult months and come out the other side stronger. Emily's contribution, her money, her strategy, her connections. These became, in Nathan's retelling, background support, wifely assistance, the kind of thing a good partner does. He stopped saying she had saved the company. He started saying she had believed in him. These are, of course, not the same thing at all, Emily noticed. She did not say anything, not then, because the company was doing well and their children were growing up in a stable and comfortable home, and there were at that time still good moments between them, moments of genuine warmth and shared laughter, and the kind of comfortable intimacy that builds up over years of sleeping in the same bed and raising children together. She told herself that the credit mattered less than the result. She told herself that she did not need her name on the company's success to know the truth of what she had done. But the problem with telling yourself something long enough is that you have to keep telling yourself louder and louder as the evidence on the other side accumulates. 5 years after the first crisis, there was a second one. A business partner had made commitments that exposed the company to significant legal liability. Emily spent 6 months negotiating a resolution that kept the firm out of court and out of the press. She did it mostly on her own during evenings after the children were asleep and on weekends when Nathan was on the golf course. She did it without fanfare, without credit, and without complaint. Nathan gave a press statement afterward about his decisive leadership during a challenging period. Emily had written the press statement. 7 years after that, a large and aggressive competitor attempted a hostile acquisition of a subsidiary that Emily had quietly established as a protective holding structure for the company's most valuable intellectual property. The competitor had not expected the holding structure to exist. Their legal team spent 3 weeks trying to find a way through it before ultimately withdrawing. Nathan never fully understood what had stopped them. Emily had set that holding structure up 6 years earlier, at a time when she had seen the competitive landscape shifting in a direction nobody else had noticed yet. It was the kind of long-term strategic thinking that requires you to set a trap and then wait patiently for years for someone to walk into it. When they did, she said nothing. She just watched the competitor retreat and went back to her work and kept her silence. But the silence over 20 years had become its own kind of erosion. She had watched Nathan grow into his success the way a plant grows toward whatever light is available naturally, necessarily without particular malice, but also without any real awareness of what it was covering as it spread. She had watched him accept awards for strategies she had developed and shake hands with investors she had cultivated and give speeches about resilience and vision that she recognized as paraphrases of conversations they had had in their kitchen on Sunday mornings. She had watched and she had documented. Because Emily Parker, born Emily Carson, daughter of a woman who knew that assets mattered more than titles, had been taught from her earliest years that the most important thing you could do was keep records. Her mother had kept records. Her mother's records were what had allowed the Carson family to survive a business dispute that might otherwise have cost them everything. Emily had kept records. For 20 years, she had maintained a private archive, not out of anticipation of this specific moment, not with any deliberate agenda, but simply because she was the kind of person who understood that the truth, once it has been lived, has a tendency to get revised by the people who find it inconvenient. And she had always believed in the same quiet and absolute way that she believed in most things, that the truth deserved a witness. So by the time Nathan handed her those divorce papers on the evening of her 42nd birthday, Emily had in her possession documentation that was comprehensive, organized, and in several key respects, devastating. The question was never whether she had it. The question was whether she would use it. She had made that decision 3 weeks before the party on a Tuesday afternoon, when she had found, while reviewing the company's financial records as she did every quarter, another habit Nathan had long since stopped questioning: a series of transactions that crossed a line she had not expected even Nathan to cross. It was not just the misappropriation of company resources for personal expenses, though that was there. It was not just the quiet redirecting of funds through accounts that should not have existed, though that was there too. It was something more specific and more dangerous, a communication thread between Nathan and a representative from a rival firm, in which Nathan had offered to share proprietary strategic information belonging to Whitmore Consulting, in exchange for a package that included a senior role at the competing company and a financial arrangement that had been structured very carefully to avoid easy detection. Nathan was not just trying to leave the company. He was trying to take something valuable with him on the way out and leave everyone else holding the damage. Emily had sat with that knowledge for 3 weeks. She had not confronted Nathan. She had not cried. She had made phone calls, spoken to attorneys, met quietly with 2 members of the company's board, and organized with her characteristic precision the materials that were now sitting in Gerald Stafford's briefcase. And then she had come to her own birthday party in a blue dress and allowed her husband to hand her divorce papers in front of 50 people because she understood in a way that Nathan never would, that the stage he had set for her humiliation was the same stage he had handed her for her testimony. When the screen lit up that night in the Whitmore family estate, the first document was not dramatic. It was a simple financial statement clearly dated, showing a private transfer of funds from Emily Carson Whitmore's personal accounts into Whitmore Consulting's operating accounts during the crisis years. The amount was significant. The date was unambiguous. Nathan looked at the screen. He looked at Emily. "What is this?" he asked, and there was something in his voice, not yet fear, but the cousin of fear, the thing that precedes it. The sensation of a man who has walked confidently into a room and is only now beginning to notice that the floor has a different texture than he expected. "It's the truth," Emily said. "You wanted honesty tonight. So did I." "Emily," Nathan started. "I'm not finished," she said. The room was absolutely silent. Gerald Stafford placed the second set of documents on the display. These were strategic plans, business proposals, market expansion analyses, all of them dated, all of them in Emily's handwriting or bearing her digital signature, all of them corresponding to decisions and announcements that Nathan had publicly taken credit for year after year after year. Someone in the back of the room whispered something. Emily did not hear the words, but she heard the tone. Nathan's face had changed. The confidence was still there, or its ghost was there, the shape of confidence without the substance, like a building that looks intact from the outside after an earthquake has shaken its foundation loose. He straightened. He spread his hands. He adopted the posture of a man preparing to reason with a room, to contextualize, to reframe. "These are company documents," he said with an attempt at authority. They belong to the record," Gerald Stafford said from the back of the room. His voice was the voice of a man who had spent 40 years making courtrooms listen to him. "And the record, Mr. Whitmore, is quite clear." Nathan turned to look at his father. Robert Whitmore had not moved from his chair. He was looking at his son with an expression that was not anger. It was deeper than anger, the complicated grief of a parent watching their child become someone they do not recognize. "Dad," Nathan said. Robert said nothing. The third set of documents appeared on the screen. These were different. These were the ones that made the room go cold. These were the communication records, the messages between Nathan and the representative from the rival firm, the financial arrangements, the proprietary information, the offer. Nathan's attorney, a sharp-faced man named Collins, who had been standing near the catering table and whom Emily had deliberately not approached before this moment, so that his reaction would be authentic, moved toward Nathan quickly and spoke into his ear in a low, urgent voice. Nathan shook his head once. Then after a moment he nodded. He did not speak again for several minutes. Emily watched him absorb it. She watched the mathematics of his situation arrive at him all at once, the board members in the room, the attorney who had been called, the documents on the screen, the 50 witnesses, his own father's face. She watched him calculate what could be salvaged and arrive at an answer she could have told him 3 weeks ago. Very little, possibly nothing. "I think," Emily said quietly, addressing the room, "that this is probably a good moment for some of us to speak privately. Gerald, if you could coordinate with the board members." "Emily." Nathan's voice cracked on her name. "Just slightly. Just enough." She stopped. She looked at him. And for a single moment, behind the documents and the attorney and the 50 witnesses and the 20 years of accumulated silence, she looked at the man she had stood next to in a church when she was 28 years old, the man who had once made her laugh until she cried, the man who had held her hand in the hospital when their daughter was born, the man who had at some point in the long middle of their marriage gotten lost in himself and never found his way back out. She had loved him. She had loved him genuinely and fully and for a very long time. That was not nothing. That would never be nothing. But love, Emily Parker had learned, was not the same thing as permission. And she had given Nathan Whitmore 20 years of permission, 20 years of silence, 20 years of building something that he had tried to tear down on her birthday night in front of the people she loved most, with a smile on his face and a sealed envelope in his hand. She had given him everything. What he had tried to give her back was an exit. She had something different in mind. "We'll talk," she said. "Soon, I promise." And then Emily Parker in her blue dress with the divorce papers folded in their envelope under her arm, and the whole quiet architecture of her 20-year truth finally fully visible to everyone in the room, turned back to Gerald Stafford and began the conversation that would change everything. Nathan stood in the center of the room where he had believed he was ending her story, and for the first time in 20 years, he had absolutely no idea what came next. The room had not exhaled yet. 50 people stood in various stages of shock, holding champagne glasses they had forgotten to drink from watching Emily Parker, with the focused, helpless attention of witnesses at an accident who cannot look away and cannot intervene. Gerald Stafford was moving quietly through the room, his leather briefcase now open on the long side table, distributing folders to the 3 board members who had been present that evening. Nathan's attorney, Collins, had his hand on Nathan's arm and was speaking rapidly into his ear. Nathan was not listening. Nathan was watching Emily the way a man watches a building he thought was empty suddenly turn on every light at once. Emily was talking to Robert Whitmore. Not loudly, not dramatically. She had crossed the room to where Nathan's father still sat in his chair by the window, and she had crouched down beside him so that she was at his eye level, and she was speaking to him in the low, unhurried tone that she reserved for conversations that mattered. Robert's hands were flat on the table. He had not moved them. His face had aged 10 years in the last 15 minutes. "I'm sorry you had to find out this way," Emily said. "That was never my intention." Robert looked at her for a long moment. His jaw moved once like he was testing words before he committed to them. Then he said, "How long have you known about the other firm?" 3 weeks, Emily said. Robert closed his eyes. "I needed time to verify everything," she continued, "and I needed to make sure the right people were in the room when it came out." "You planned this." It was not an accusation. It was almost an admission. "I planned to protect the company," Emily said. "What Nathan planned, I didn't choose that part." Robert opened his eyes. He looked across the room at his son, who was now arguing in tight, controlled whispers with Collins, while 2 of the board members approached with the folders Gerald had handed them. Robert's expression was the expression of a man who has spent decades building something and is watching the wrong person try to burn it down from the inside. He reached out and put his hand over Emily's. "Tell me everything," he said, "from the beginning." And that was the moment Nathan noticed. He looked across the room past Collins and past the board members and past the 50 guests who were still hovering in stunned uncertainty, and he saw his father's hand covering Emily's hand. He saw the look on Robert's face. And something in Nathan Whitmore, some last remaining structure that had been holding the performance of this evening upright, collapsed. "Dad!" His voice came out louder than he intended. Several heads turned. "Dad, whatever she's telling you." "Nathan." Robert did not raise his voice. He never had to. In 40 years of running a company and raising a son, Robert Whitmore had perfected the particular tone that meant the conversation was over. "Sit down." Nathan did not sit down, but he stopped talking. Collins touched his arm again. This time, Nathan shook him off. The next 20 minutes were the strangest of the evening, and the evening had already set a high bar for strangeness. Guests drifted into small clusters, speaking in low voices, the catered food growing cold on the tables. The string quartet had packed up and left with a kind of professional sensitivity that Emily had always associated with musicians who understood better than most that some rooms needed to be quiet. Diane had stationed herself near Emily, like a sentinel not speaking, just present the way a good friend knows how to be. Nathan paced. It was a thing Emily had watched him do for 20 years in moments of pressure. The boardroom pacer, his assistant used to call it, half affectionately and half in warning to whoever was scheduled to meet with him that day. He moved in a tight circuit between the fireplace and the long window hands clasped behind his back, and Emily could see him working through the calculus of his situation, the same way he always worked through a crisis, not with genuine reflection, but with the frantic efficiency of a man looking for the exit. He found Collins again. "What's our exposure?" Nathan asked, quiet enough that only the people nearest to him could hear. Collins looked at him with the expression of an attorney who has just been asked to perform a miracle on short notice. "Nathan, I need you to not say anything else tonight, to anyone. Do you understand what I'm telling you?" "I understand what you're telling me. What's our exposure?" Significant Collins said the single word carrying the weight of everything he was not saying in a room full of people he did not trust. The communications alone, those communications were taken out of context. Collins stared at him. "I've seen them, Nathan. They were exploratory, preliminary. Nothing was finalized. Nathan." Collins dropped his voice even further. "I am your attorney, and I am telling you as your attorney that right now the most important thing you can do is stop talking." Nathan looked at Collins. He looked across the room at Emily, who was still with Robert, who was now reading something in one of the folders Gerald had distributed. He looked at the board members, two of whom were on their phones, and he made the calculation that any person in his position eventually makes the calculation between what can still be controlled and what has already escaped. He walked toward Emily. Collins said sharply, "Nathan." Nathan kept walking. The room noticed. The clusters of guests shifted collectively, almost imperceptibly, their bodies orienting toward the confrontation, the way they had oriented toward Nathan's toast earlier in the evening. Diane stepped forward slightly. Emily did not look up until Nathan was standing directly in front of her. "I need to talk to you," Nathan said. "Privately." Emily finished the sentence she had been speaking to Robert. Then she looked up at her husband. "All right," she said. They moved to the study off the main room, the room where Robert kept his books and his old company photographs, where the two of them had sat together once years ago, when Robert had first handed Nathan the reins of the company, and Emily had been beside him smiling full of hope for what they were going to build together. Nathan closed the door. For a moment neither of them spoke. Then Nathan said, "How much of this is about the money?" Emily blinked. Of all the things she had expected him to say, that was not it. "Excuse me." "The inheritance, the loans. Is this about repayment? Because if that's what this is—" "Nathan," her voice was very quiet, "do you actually believe that—" "I don't know what to believe right now." He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture she had seen 1,000 times, the gesture of a man under pressure, reverting to his most familiar self. "I don't know what tonight was. I don't know what you're trying to do." "I'm trying to tell the truth," Emily said. "That's all I've ever been trying to do." "You humiliated me." The word landed between them. Emily let it sit there for a moment before she answered. "Nathan," she said slowly, "you handed me divorce papers at my birthday party, in front of our children's godmother, in front of 3 members of your board, in front of your father." She paused. "You said I had been living in your shadow." Nathan said nothing. "You built a narrative about our marriage," Emily continued, "in which you were the architect of everything and I was furniture. And you delivered that narrative publicly to an audience on my birthday, without warning and without the basic dignity of a private conversation. And you're asking me if I humiliated you." The silence that followed was the specific silence of a man who has made an argument and lost it before he finished making it. Nathan sat down in one of Robert's armchairs. He looked suddenly very tired. "I didn't know about the documents," he said. The board needed to know. The communications." He stopped, started again. "Emily, I want you to know that I never actually signed anything," she said. "I know, that was fortunate for you. I wasn't going to go through with it." Emily looked at him. She had spent 20 years learning his face, learning the specific way his eyes moved when he was telling the truth, and the specific way they went very still when he was not. His eyes right now were very still. "I believe," she said carefully, "that you believe that." Nathan put his face in his hands. Outside the door, the muffled sounds of the party that had become something else entirely. Voices, movement, the occasional sharp tone of a business conversation happening where celebration had been planned. Emily could hear Gerald Stafford's measured baritone through the wall. "I want to fix this," Nathan said into his hands. "Which part?" He looked up. "All of it." "Nathan." Emily sat down across from him. Not close, but not as far as she might have been. "You walked into this room tonight, into our life, with papers designed to end it. You said I was nothing. You said you were done. You staged it. You planned that speech. You had that envelope prepared and wrapped." She paused. "Which part exactly are you planning to fix?" His jaw tightened. "I was angry." "You've been angry for years," she said. "I watched it happen. I watched you get more successful and angrier at the same time, which should have told me something, but I kept thinking it would pass. I kept thinking you'd find whatever it was you were looking for, and then we'd—" She stopped. Her voice had gone to a place she had not planned to take it, and she pulled it back. "It doesn't matter what I kept thinking. It matters to me." "Does it?" The question landed like a slap, quiet and precise. Nathan flinched. "I loved you," Emily said. "I want you to hear that because I don't think you do fully." I loved you genuinely, for a long time. And the things I did, the money, the work, the staying quiet while you got the credit, none of that was strategic. I didn't build a case file for 20 years, waiting for the right moment to use it against you. I kept records because I was taught to keep records. I stayed quiet because I believed in what we were building together. I restructured my inheritance into your company because I wanted us to survive. Nathan was very still now. But you, Emily said, didn't just take the credit. You took the story. You rewrote 20 years in your head until you genuinely believed you had done it alone. And when you believed it completely enough, you decided that the person who had actually been there was the obstacle. The silence stretched. Then Nathan said very quietly, "What do you want, Emily? Tell me what you actually want." She looked at him for a long time. "I wanted a partner," she said. "For 20 years, that's what I wanted. I don't want it anymore." She stood up. "What I want now is a fair settlement, a proper accounting of my contributions to this company, and the same respect in this divorce that I should have been shown in this marriage." She moved toward the door. "Emily." Nathan's voice broke on the second syllable, just barely, just enough to hear. She stopped with her hand on the door. "I'm sorry," he said. "For tonight. I'm sorry for tonight." Emily did not turn around. She stood there for a moment with her hand on the door, and she breathed once steadily, and she let the apology be what it was too late and too small, and probably the most honest thing he had said all evening. "I know," she said. And she opened the door and walked back into the room where 50 people were waiting, and where her life, the real one, the one she had built and protected and refused to abandon, was about to announce itself to the world. The board meeting happened the following morning. Emily had not slept. She suspected Nathan had not either. The house, their house still for the moment, had been very quiet in the hours between midnight and dawn, the two of them existing in separate rooms, separated by walls and by everything that had been said and not said by 20 years and one terrible evening. She was dressed and ready at 7. Gerald met her in the lobby of the Whitmore Consulting Building at 7:45. Robert was already there. Nathan arrived at 8 with Collins at his shoulder, wearing the expression of a man who has not slept and has not yet decided how to arrange his face for what comes next. The boardroom was on the 14th floor, floor-to-ceiling windows, the kind of room that had always made Nathan feel powerful, elevated in command. Emily had always found it slightly cold. She sat across from the window today. The board had 5 members. 2 had been present at the party the night before. All 5 had received Gerald's documents by secure email at 11 o'clock the previous evening. All 5 had read them. Emily could see it in the way they arranged themselves, not around Nathan, the way boards tend to arrange themselves around a CEO out of habit and hierarchy, but in a more careful, more considered formation, the formation of people who are weighing something. Richard Cho, the board's chair, opened the meeting. "I want to begin," Richard said, "by acknowledging that this is an unusual circumstance. We are here to address 2 separate but related matters. The question of financial contributions to this company that may not have been properly recognized or compensated, and the question of conduct by our current CEO that may represent a breach of his fiduciary duties." Nathan said, "Richard, if I could—" "Nathan," Richard's voice was not unkind, "you'll have an opportunity to speak. Please let me finish." Nathan sat back. Collins put a restraining hand on the table near Nathan's arm. Nathan did not look at it. "The documents provided to this board," Richard continued, "have been reviewed by our legal team this morning. We also received at 6 a.m. a statement from Robert Whitmore, who as the company's founder holds advisory status with this board." Nathan's head turned sharply. He looked at his father. Robert was looking at the table. "Dad," Nathan said, "you gave them a statement." Robert looked up then. "I gave them the truth, Nathan, the way Emily gave you the truth last night." His voice was steady, but worn, the voice of a man who had made a very painful decision and was not going to pretend it had been easy. "You left me no choice. I'm your son." "Yes," Robert said, "you are. And I spent 30 years building this company so that you would have something to inherit and something to be proud of. And last night, I found out that you were willing to sell its most valuable information to a competitor to secure yourself a position on the way out." His voice did not waver. "What would you have had me do, Nathan, protect you from the consequences of that?" Nathan said nothing. The boardroom was very quiet. Richard Cho cleared his throat. Based on the documents provided and the statement received, this board has several motions to consider this morning. The first concerns the formal recognition and compensation of Emily Parker's financial and strategic contributions to this company over the past 20 years. Emily kept her expression neutral. The second, Richard continued, concerns an investigation into the conduct described in the communications between Nathan Whitmore and a representative of Blackbridge Technologies, with particular reference to the potential sharing of proprietary information. Collins leaned toward Nathan and said very quietly, "Do not speak." Nathan for once listened. The third motion, the one that made the room shift, the one that nobody in the boardroom had been entirely certain would be on the agenda, until Richard Cho cleared his throat for the second time and looked directly at Nathan, was the motion to suspend Nathan Whitmore from his duties as CEO, pending the outcome of the investigation. Suspended, not fired, not yet, but suspended. Nathan stood up. "You cannot do this," he said. His voice had lost its careful modulation. He sounded the way he had sounded 20 years ago, when the company was in its first crisis, frightened and angry and reaching for authority he wasn't sure he had. "I built this company." "Nathan," Collins said. "No." Nathan shook his head. "No, I'm not sitting here while this is my company. My father's company. My name is on the door." "Your name," Robert said very quietly, "is on the door because I put it there. And if you'll sit down and stop making this worse, there may still be a version of this that you survive." The word survive landed in the room with particular weight. Nathan looked at his father. He looked at Emily. Emily met his eyes steadily. She did not look away. She did not look triumphant. She looked, if anything, profoundly tired, the tiredness of a person who has carried something heavy for a very long time and has finally at some cost set it down. Nathan sat down. The vote on the first motion was 5-0. Emily Parker's financial contributions to Whitmore Consulting would be formally recognized. A proper accounting would be conducted. Compensation in the form of equity and settlement would be negotiated. The vote on the second motion, the investigation, was 5-0. The vote on the third motion was 4-1. The one dissenting vote was Robert Whitmore's. Not because he disagreed, he told the board quietly, but because he could not vote to suspend his own son. He wanted that distinction in the record. He wanted it understood that he was not separating himself from Nathan, only from Nathan's choices. Nathan did not look at his father during this explanation. He was looking at his hands. After the meeting, Emily stood in the corridor outside the boardroom while Gerald gathered the document folders and the board members filtered out in ones and twos, each of them offering her a version of the same look, the look of people who have just finished recalibrating something they thought they understood. Diane appeared at the end of the corridor. She had been waiting on the lobby level for 2 hours. She walked the length of the corridor quickly, and she hugged Emily without saying anything first, and Emily stood in that hug for a moment longer than she usually allowed herself such things. "How do you feel?" Diane asked when she pulled back. Emily considered the question honestly, the way she considered most things, without performance, without the first answer that came to hand. "I feel like I've been holding my breath for 20 years, she said, "and I just exhaled." Diane looked at her carefully. "Are you okay?" "No," Emily said. "Not yet." She picked up her bag. "But I think I'm going to be." They walked toward the elevator together. Behind them down the corridor, the boardroom door opened again. Nathan stepped out Collins behind him and stopped when he saw Emily at the elevator. The distance between them was perhaps 30 feet. The history between them was 20 years and one night that had changed everything. Nathan did not call out to her. He did not move toward her. He just stood in the corridor and watched her press the elevator button and wait for the doors to open, and there was something in his face in that moment, not anger, not calculation, not the performed confidence of the man who had handed her an envelope at her birthday party, but something older and simpler and more painful. The face of a person who has just understood fully and finally the size of what they have thrown away. Emily did not look back. The elevator arrived. The doors opened. She stepped inside. She pressed the button for the lobby. The doors closed. In the elevator alone, for the first time since the previous evening, Emily looked at her own reflection in the polished steel of the door. She looked at the woman looking back at her, the woman in the good suit with the steady hands and the exhausted eyes, and she felt something she had not allowed herself to feel in a very long time, something she did not have a sophisticated name for, something that was equal parts grief and relief and the particular lightness that comes when you stop pretending that a heavy thing is not heavy. She did not cry. She was going to, she suspected, at some point. Probably late at night in the house that was still technically shared with the door closed and nobody watching. She was going to grieve the marriage and the man she had loved before he became this, and the version of the future she had once imagined and had slowly, quietly stopped believing in. But that was for later. Right now in the elevator, she straightened her shoulders. The lobby came up fast. The doors opened. Emily Parker walked out into the morning. The lobby of Whitmore Consulting had a particular quality in the mornings, the kind of organized hum that Emily had always associated with a healthy company, people moving with purpose, phones ringing at the right intervals, the low murmur of competence at work. She had loved that sound once. She had helped build it. Walking through it now, 2 days after her birthday, felt like walking through a room where every piece of furniture held a memory she had not yet decided what to do with. Her phone rang before she reached the door. It was Marcus Webb, the company's head of communications. Marcus had been with Whitmore Consulting for 11 years. He was one of the people Emily had quietly mentored without ever officially being his mentor. The kind of professional relationship that develops when a smart person in an organization figures out very quickly who actually knows what they are doing. "Emily," he said, "I need you to know something before it hits the press." She stopped walking. "Tell me." "Someone from last night talked. I don't know who yet, but there are already 2 journalists calling the main line asking for comment on a quote leadership dispute at Whitmore Consulting. One of them specifically mentioned the birthday party." Emily closed her eyes for exactly 1 second. Then she opened them. "How long do we have?" "Hours, maybe less. One of them is from the Business Journal. Call Gerald Stafford. Tell him to expect media inquiries and to prepare a holding statement. Nothing substantive, nothing that confirms or denies the investigation, just enough to show the company has its hands on the wheel." "Got it. Emily." Marcus paused. "Are you okay?" "I'm working on it," she said. "Keep me posted." She hung up and stood on the sidewalk outside the building for a moment, feeling the particular weight of a story that has left the room. It started in and is now moving on its own faster than anyone planned. This was the thing about truth, she thought. Once you released it, it did not wait for you. She called Gerald. Gerald had already heard. He had a draft statement ready within the hour, and by noon it had been released, careful, measured, and completely in control of the one thing that mattered most in the first hours of a public crisis, which was the narrative frame. The statement did not confirm Nathan's suspension. It confirmed the board's commitment to governance integrity and announced that a review of leadership and financial structures was underway. It named Emily Parker as a key stakeholder in that review. It was the first time Emily's name had appeared in an official company communication in 20 years, she noticed. She did not say anything about it to anyone, but she noticed. Nathan noticed too. He called her at 2 in the afternoon from a number she almost did not pick up because she did not immediately recognize it. He had called from a hotel. He was not at the house. She had not expected him to be. "You saw the statement," he said. "It was not a question. I helped draft it." A pause. "Of course you did." There was no malice in his voice, which surprised her. Just a kind of flat exhaustion that she recognized because she had been living inside her own version of it for the past 48 hours. "The press is going to come after me," he said. "Yes." "Is there anything in what Gerald has prepared that—" "Nathan," Emily said, "I am not protecting you from the press. That is not something I'm able to do, and it is not something you should ask me to do right now." A longer pause. I know that. I just—" He stopped. She could hear him breathing on the other end of the line. "I keep thinking about what Dad said, in the boardroom, about surviving this." "That's a conversation to have with Robert," Emily said, "and with Collins. I want to have it with you." "I know you do." She kept her voice even. "But I'm not your crisis manager anymore, Nathan. I haven't been for a long time. I just didn't say so out loud until now." She ended the call. She sat with the phone in her hand for a long moment, afterward feeling the specific shape of that conversation, the way it had the same texture as 100 previous conversations. Nathan in trouble, reaching for Emily. Emily steadying the ground under his feet while her own shifted. The difference was that this time she had not steadied anything. She had simply declined, and the declinature had felt not cold, not cruel, but clean. The cleanest thing she had done in years. The press story broke fully the following morning. By the standards of Seattle Business News, it was a significant one. The Business Journal ran it on the front page of their digital edition with a headline that managed to be both accurate and devastating. Whitmore Consulting CEO suspended amid investigation. Co-founder's wife identified as key financial backer. A second outlet went further, pulling public records that corroborated portions of what Gerald had released and adding details that someone somewhere Emily suspected one of the 50 guests, someone peripheral, someone who had not fully understood what they were releasing, had provided off the record. By noon, Nathan's suspension was public knowledge in every boardroom in the Pacific Northwest. By 3 in the afternoon, Emily's phone had received 47 calls, including 2 from journalists, 1 from a business school colleague she had not spoken to in 8 years, 1 from the organization that handled her mother's charitable trust, and 1 from a woman named Sandra Okafor, who was the CEO of a mid-sized consulting firm based in Portland, and who had been 15 years ago a client that Emily had personally saved from a disastrous acquisition. Sandra did not waste time. "I heard what happened," Sandra said. "I want to take you to dinner, and I want to make you an offer." Emily, who had not eaten a real meal in 2 days, said, "Dinner, yes, an offer, we'll see." They met that evening at a quiet restaurant in Capitol Hill. Sandra was a small, precise woman in her late 50s with sharp eyes and the kind of stillness that Emily had always associated with people who had learned to be patient because patience had served them well. She ordered wine and did not open with pleasantries. "I've known for years that you were the one running that company," Sandra said. Anyone who paid attention knew Nathan was a front, a good-looking, well-spoken front, but a front. "Nathan contributed," Emily said. "It would be inaccurate to say otherwise." Sandra looked at her. "You're defending him." "I'm being precise," Emily said. "Those aren't the same thing." Sandra smiled. "That," she said, "is exactly why I want to make you this offer." The offer was a consulting arrangement. Sandra's company, Okafor Strategic Group, had been approached by 3 different private equity firms in the past year about potential partnerships, and Sandra wanted someone with Emily's specific combination of financial restructuring experience and corporate strategy expertise to lead the evaluation and negotiation process. "It would be a significant engagement," Sandra said. 6 to 12 months, substantial compensation, and complete credit your name on the work your face in the rooms. Emily looked at her wine glass. She thought about 20 years of rooms where her face had been present and her name had been absent. She thought about Gerald Stafford's briefcase and the board vote and the statement with her name in it for the first time in 2 decades. "I'll need to resolve some things with Whitmore first," she said. "Of course," Sandra said, "but the offer is real and it's not going anywhere." Emily nodded. She drove home that night with the particular feeling of a person who has stood at a crossroads for so long that the standing has become its own kind of inertia, and who has just for the first time in a very long time taken a step. The house was empty when she arrived. Their son James was in his 2nd year at university in Boston. Their daughter Claire, a senior in high school, was staying with Diane for the week. Emily had arranged that before the birthday party, with a quiet foresight that she had not explained to anyone. She had known that whatever happened that night would not leave the house unchanged, and she had not wanted Claire to be in it while the walls were still vibrating. She missed her daughter with a physical sharpness that surprised her. She called her. "Mom." Claire's voice on the phone was careful in the way of a 17-year-old who knows that something serious has happened and is trying to gauge the distance between concern and intrusion. "How are you?" "I'm okay, sweetheart. I wanted to hear your voice." "Diane told me a little bit about the party." A pause. "She didn't tell me everything, but I could tell she was leaving things out." Emily sat down on this kitchen stool. "Your dad and I are going to be divorcing. I want you to hear that from me clearly, and I want you to know that whatever you're feeling about it is okay." Silence on the other end. Not the silence of shock. Claire had always been perceptive, and Emily suspected she had seen the shape of this coming long before the birthday party. The silence of a person absorbing something they already knew, but had not yet let themselves fully believe. "Are you okay?" Claire asked finally. Her voice had shifted younger, suddenly worried in the way of a child, rather than the careful teenager who had picked up the phone. "I'm going to be," Emily said. "I promise you I'm going to be." "What about Dad?" Emily considered the question for a moment. She thought about Nathan in the hotel room, calling from an unfamiliar number. She thought about his face in the boardroom. The 4-to-1 vote. Robert's measured explanation of why he could not vote against his own son, but could not protect him either. Your dad is going to have to figure some things out, Emily said carefully. That's going to take time, but he loves you. That part is real. I know, Claire said. And then quietly, I'm proud of you, Mom. Emily closed her eyes. She was not going to cry on the phone with her daughter. She was going to save that for after she hung up, which she did 2 minutes later, and then she sat in the kitchen of the house she had lived in for 15 years, and let herself feel fully and without performance every complicated thing that was moving through her. It lasted about 10 minutes. Then she made tea, opened her laptop, and started reviewing the equity documentation that Gerald had sent over that afternoon. She was, after all, still her mother's daughter. 3 days later, Collins contacted Gerald with a proposed settlement framework. Gerald brought it to Emily on a Thursday morning, and they sat in his conference room with 2 cups of coffee and the kind of quiet professionalism that Emily had come to associate with conversations that had real stakes. Gerald laid the documents on the table and looked at her steadily. It's a starting point, he said, not an offer we accept. Emily read through it. Nathan was proposing a clean financial settlement, a lump sum that represented a portion of the value of her original investment, plus an acknowledgement of her contributions, framed as a spousal advisory role. The language was careful. The framing was careful. The number was not small. It was also not right. This values my contributions at roughly 30 cents on the dollar, Emily said. Yes. And it frames 20 years of strategic work as spousal support. Yes. Emily set the document down. What's our counter? Gerald had it ready. He always did. The counter was different in every respect that mattered. It proposed formal equity recognition and ownership stake in Whitmore Consulting that reflected Emily's documented financial contributions and verifiable strategic role over the past 20 years. It proposed that the advisory framing be replaced with the accurate one. And it included a provision that Emily had asked Gerald to add, which was the one that had made him raise his eyebrows slightly when she first mentioned it. The provision stipulated that as part of the settlement, Emily's contributions to the company be formally documented and entered into the company's official record, not just acknowledged privately, not just compensated financially, recorded, permanently, in the company's history. Collins is going to push back on that last one, Gerald said. I know, Emily said. Let him. Collins did push back. Hard. The next 2 weeks were a negotiation conducted entirely through attorneys, and they had the texture of all such negotiations, incremental, frustrating, punctuated by moments where the whole thing seemed about to collapse, and then didn't. Nathan's attorneys argued that the documentation provision was punitive. Gerald argued that it was accurate. Nathan's attorneys argued that Emily's equity claim was inflated. Gerald produced more documents. Nathan's attorneys asked for more time. Gerald gave them a deadline. Through all of it, Emily did not speak directly to Nathan. She spoke to Gerald. She spoke to Robert twice in conversations that were quiet and careful, and that carried between them the specific weight of 2 people who had cared about the same man in very different ways, and were both in different ways, grieving the gap between who he was and who he might have been. Robert did not make excuses for his son in these conversations. That more than anything was what told Emily how seriously he was taking everything. "I was always impatient," Robert said in one of these conversations. "Even as a boy, he wanted the harvest before the seeds were planted." He paused. "I should have seen it earlier." "You saw it now," Emily said. "That's not the same thing." "No," she agreed, "but it's something." The settlement negotiation reached its crisis point on a Wednesday afternoon, 3 weeks after the birthday party, when Collins called Gerald with a final position that was meaningfully better on the financial terms, but still resisting the documentation provision. Gerald relayed the call to Emily within the hour. Emily thought about it for exactly 4 minutes. She had timed herself without meaning to. Then she said, "Tell him we're filing for full equity discovery if they won't agree to the documentation, and tell him we're prepared to go to court." Gerald looked at her. "Are we? Are you prepared to take this to court?" Emily said. Gerald considered. "Yes." "Then we're prepared." Collins called back within 2 hours. Nathan had agreed to the documentation provision. Gerald called Emily with the news at 6:30 in the evening. She was in Sandra Okafor's office in Portland, in the middle of a working dinner where 3 different financial models were spread across the conference table, and she excused herself to take the call in the hallway. "He agreed," Gerald said. Emily leaned against the wall. All of it. All of it. Equity stake at the agreed valuation, full documentation of contributions, the historical record provision, everything. She was quiet for a moment. "Emily." "I'm here," she said. "I'm here. Good. That's good, Gerald." "It's more than good," he said. There was something warm in his voice, the warmth of a man who has seen many settlements and knows the difference between a fair one and a just one. "It's right." She thanked him and went back into Sandra's conference room and sat down and looked at the financial models on the table, and Sandra looked at her across the table with the sharp eyes of a woman who has just read something in another person's face. "Good news," Sandra said. "Yes," Emily said. "The settlement." "Yes." Sandra picked up her wine glass. "Then we should celebrate before we get back to work." Emily looked at the glass Sandra was tilting toward her in a toast. She thought about the champagne at her birthday party, the glasses held by 50 people frozen in a moment of collective shock. She thought about the envelope and the folded papers and the smile she had produced from somewhere inside herself. The smile that had not been performance, but had been something closer to recognition. The recognition of a woman who has waited for the right moment for a very long time and has just felt it arrive. She picked up her glass. "To accuracy," Emily said. Sandra smiled. "To accuracy." They drank. The investigation into Nathan's communications with Blackbridge Technologies concluded its preliminary phase at the end of that same week. The findings were not released publicly in full. They rarely were in matters that had legal dimensions still to be determined. But the summary that went to the board was clear enough. The communications had been substantive. The information Nathan had offered was proprietary. The arrangement had not been finalized, which was the one factor working in his favor, but the intent was documented in Nathan's own words, in messages he had sent from his personal device over a 6-week period. The board met on a Friday. Emily was not in the room for this meeting. She was represented by Gerald, who was there in his capacity as a company stakeholders' counsel, but Emily herself was not present. She had decided deliberately not to attend. This was not her boardroom drama to conduct. She had given the board the information they needed. What they did with it was theirs to decide. She was in her kitchen when Gerald called. "Unanimous," he said. Emily set down her coffee cup. "Unanimous removal. Unanimous removal. Effective immediately." She sat with that for a moment. The word unanimous. 5 votes. Even Robert this time. She had not expected that. She had expected Robert to abstain again to separate himself from his son's consequences the way he had in the first vote, the painful distinction of a father who could not raise his hand against his child. "Robert voted," she said. "Robert voted," Gerald confirmed. "He submitted a written statement for the record. I'll send it to you." She read it 20 minutes later, sitting at the kitchen table with her phone and a cup of tea that went cold while she read. Robert's statement was 12 sentences. It was the most honest 12 sentences she had read in a long time. He wrote about the company he had built and what it had meant to him. He wrote about the son he had trusted with it and what he had expected of that trust. He wrote that he was voting for removal not in anger, but in accountability. Because accountability, he wrote, was the only thing that had ever made a company or a person genuinely strong, and he had failed for too many years to hold his son to it. He wrote one more thing at the end. He wrote, "Emily Parker helped build this company. She deserves to have that said clearly in this room by me today. It should have been said 20 years ago. I am sorry it wasn't." Emily read those last 3 sentences twice. Then she put her phone face down on the table and looked at the wall of her kitchen for a long time, feeling the particular complicated fullness of a moment that contains too many things at once. Relief and grief and vindication and loss, all of them true simultaneously, none of them canceling the others out. Nathan called 20 minutes after Gerald did. She almost did not pick up. She picked up. He did not say anything immediately. She could hear him breathing the same way she had heard him breathing in the hotel room call, unsteady, the breath of a man who has run out of positions and is standing in the open with nothing left to defend. "I heard," she said, so he would not have to find the words to tell her. "Yeah." His voice was very quiet. "Yeah." "Nathan, don't." He stopped her, not harshly but firmly. "Don't say something kind right now. I don't think I can take it right now." She understood that, actually. She knew the way kindness could undo a person at the wrong moment, the way it could reach the places that defensiveness had been protecting and crack them open. She had experienced it herself in the elevator after the first board meeting, when Diane had hugged her without saying anything first. "Okay," Emily said. She kept it simple. She kept it clean. A long silence on the line. Then Nathan said something she had not expected. Something that did not sound like Nathan Whitmore, CEO. Something that sounded like the man she had stood next to in a church at 28 years old. "I think I forgot who you were," he said. Not on purpose, I think I needed you to be smaller than you were, because if I really looked at what you'd done, I'd have to look at what I hadn't done, and I didn't want to do that." Emily was quiet. "I'm not asking for anything," he said quickly, in case she had misread the direction. "I know I don't get to ask for anything. I just wanted to say it, because I don't think I ever said it, the real version of it." She thought about 20 years. She thought about her mother's inheritance, and the company books, and the holding structure that had stopped a hostile acquisition, and the press statement she had written, and the strategy documents she had built, and the silences she had kept, and the records she had maintained, and the truth she had finally let into the room. "I know," she said. She meant it simply. She had known somewhere, even in the worst of it. She had known that Nathan's cruelty was not premeditated the way it might look from the outside. It was not the cruelty of a person who hates. It was the cruelty of a person who needs to believe a story about themselves and will do whatever it takes to protect that story from the complications of reality. That did not make it acceptable, but it made it something she could understand, if not forgive. "Not yet. Take care of yourself, Nathan," she said. She ended the call. She sat in the kitchen for another few minutes. Then she opened her laptop, pulled up the consulting engagement documentation that Sandra had sent over, and began to read. The work was interesting, genuinely interesting. The kind of problem she had always loved, complex, multivariable, with no obvious solution that presented itself on the first pass. She made notes in the margins. She drew a small diagram of stakeholder relationships on the corner of a legal pad. She circled 2 numbers that did not align and wrote a question mark next to them. She was still working 2 hours later when her phone lit up with a text from Gerald. It said, "The board has asked to meet with you Monday morning. They want to discuss the interim leadership structure." Emily read the message. She thought about what interim leadership structure meant in the context of a company that had just removed its CEO, a company that was entering a sensitive and closely watched period, a company whose board had just unanimously acknowledged that the person who had been quietly steering it for 20 years was sitting outside the building. She thought about Sandra's offer. She thought about Robert's 12 sentences. She thought about the documentation provision in her settlement. Her contributions entered permanently into the company's official record. She thought about what it would mean to walk back into that boardroom on Monday, not as someone's wife, not as a background presence, not as a stakeholders' counsel, or a beneficiary, or a subject of an investigation, but as herself. Emily Parker, the person who had saved the company twice and built it quietly for 20 years, and had finally, on the night of her 42nd birthday, put everything she had done into the light where it belonged. She typed back to Gerald, "Tell them I'll be there." She set the phone down. She went back to her notes. Outside, the city was moving through its ordinary Friday evening, indifferent and continuous, the way cities always are, the way the world always is, around the edges of even the most significant personal moments. Emily worked at her kitchen table with the legal pad and the laptop and the cold tea, and she felt underneath everything, underneath the grief and the exhaustion and the long, complicated aftermath of 20 years coming undone. Something she had not felt in longer than she could clearly remember. She felt like herself. The Monday morning meeting was scheduled for 9 o'clock. Emily arrived at 8:45. She had always believed that the person who arrives first controls the room before it fills, and old habits, particularly the useful ones, do not dissolve easily. She wore a charcoal blazer she had bought 3 years ago and never had occasion to wear, because the occasions she attended had always been Nathan's occasions, and Nathan's occasions called for the particular kind of understated elegance that supported rather than competed with the person everyone was actually there to see. The blazer was different. It was the kind of thing a person wears when they are the one everyone is there to see. Gerald met her in the lobby. He looked at her the way he had been looking at her since the birthday party, with a kind of careful, professional respect that had something else underneath it, something that Emily recognized as the particular regard of a person who has watched someone handle an extraordinary situation with extraordinary composure, and has revised upward significantly their estimate of what that person is capable of. "Ready," he said. "Yes," Emily said, and meant it. The boardroom on the 14th floor looked exactly the same as it had the morning of Nathan's suspension, which was only 2 weeks ago, but felt in the way that compressed and consequential time always does, like something that had happened in a different chapter of a much longer story. The same floor-to-ceiling windows, the same long table, the same 5 chairs arranged on the far side, occupied now by the same 5 board members who had voted unanimously to remove Nathan Whitmore from the company he had inherited from his father. Richard Cho was already standing when Emily came in. He extended his hand. "Emily," he said, "thank you for coming." "Of course," she said. She sat. Gerald sat beside her. The board settled into their chairs, and there was a brief moment of the kind of collective adjustment that happens at the start of important meetings. People finding their posture, their gravity, the particular version of themselves they intend to present to the room. Richard opened without preamble. "We'll be direct with you because I think after the past 2 weeks you deserve directness above everything else." "I appreciate that," Emily said. "The company is in a sensitive position," Richard said. "The investigation is ongoing. The press is watching. Our 3 largest clients have called this office in the past 10 days, asking for reassurance, and 2 of our mid-tier clients have requested meetings that I think we all understand are not routine." He looked at her steadily. "We need stable leadership, visible, credible, capable leadership, and the board is unanimous again on the question of who provides that." Emily held his gaze. "You're asking me to step in as interim CEO. We're asking you to consider it," said Margaret Lau, the board's second longest-serving member, a woman in her early 60s who had the thoughtful precision of someone who has spent decades making consequential decisions and has learned to be very careful with her words. "We're aware that you have your own matters to resolve. We're aware that this is not a simple ask, and we want you to know that whatever you decide, the board's recognition of your contributions to this company is permanent and unconditional." Emily looked around the table. She thought about Sandra Okafor's offer, still open, still real, waiting in Portland, like a door someone had propped open and was patiently holding. She thought about the consulting engagement documentation on her kitchen table. She thought about what it had felt like to sit in Sandra's conference room with 3 financial models spread out in front of her and feel genuinely, cleanly interested in a problem for the first time in longer than she could name. She thought about the company. The employees on the floors below this one who had come to work every day for years without knowing the full story of what had been holding their organization together. The strategies she had built that were still running, still in motion, still generating the outcomes she had designed for them years ago. She thought about Robert Whitmore's 12 sentences. "I have some conditions," she said. Richard nodded once. "We expected you might." The interim role is exactly that, interim. I will stabilize the company during the investigation period and through the leadership transition. I am not committing to a permanent appointment at this stage. She looked at each of them in turn. "Second, my title reflects my actual function. Not acting CEO, not interim advisor. CEO interim. The difference matters." "Agreed," Richard said. "Third, and this one is non-negotiable. The historical record provision in my settlement extends to the company's official communications, not just internal documentation. When we address our clients, our partners, and the press about this period of transition, my role in the company's history is stated accurately. I will not be introduced as Nathan's wife, who is stepping in to hold things together. I will be introduced as a founding strategic partner, assuming leadership during a transition." The board looked at each other. Margaret Lau smiled slightly, the smile of a woman who has been waiting for someone to say exactly that for quite some time. "Agreed," she said. "Fourth," Emily said, "I want full access to every financial record, every client file, and every strategic document in this building from the past 20 years. Not because I don't have my own records, I do, but because I want to understand the complete picture before I make any decisions about where this company goes next." "That's standard for a CEO transition," Richard said. "I know," Emily said. "I just want it explicit." Richard extended his hand across the table. Emily shook it. She was, as of that moment, the interim CEO of Whitmore Consulting. She had not planned this. She wanted to be clear with herself about that because clarity mattered to her, and because there was a version of this story in which she looked like someone who had engineered every moment from the beginning, who had known all along that the birthday party would end this way, who had been building toward this boardroom for 20 years. That version was not accurate. She had kept records because she had been taught to keep records. She had assembled the truth because the truth existed and deserved to be documented. She had called Gerald Stafford because Nathan's communications with Blackbridge had crossed a line she could not ignore. She had not planned the boardroom, but she was here, and she knew what to do with here. The first thing she did when she sat down in what had been Nathan's office that afternoon was move the chair. It was a small thing, a physical adjustment, the kind a person makes when they need a space to feel like theirs, rather than borrowed. But it mattered to her, and she did it without ceremony. Just stood up, shifted the chair 6 inches to the left, and sat back down. Better. She called Marcus Webb first. "I want a staff communication drafted by end of day," she told him. "Not a press release, an internal letter. I want the employees to hear from me directly before they hear anything else." She paused. "I want it to be honest, not corporate. Honest." Marcus, to his credit, did not miss a beat. "Yes, I'll have a draft to you in 2 hours." She called Sandra Okafor second. "I heard," Sandra said before Emily could speak. "It's already on the business wire." "I wanted to tell you myself," Emily said, "about the consulting engagement." "Don't apologize," Sandra said, cutting her off cleanly. "Don't you dare apologize. The engagement will keep. This is where you're supposed to be right now." A pause. "Just promise me that when this is over, we revisit the conversation." "I promise," Emily said. She meant that too. The internal letter went out at 5:15. Marcus had done exactly what she asked. It was honest and direct and human, written in the voice of someone who understood that the people in a company are not a backdrop to its leadership drama, but the actual substance of the thing. It acknowledged the disruption of the past 2 weeks without minimizing it. It explained the transition clearly. It used Emily's name, her full name, and her actual role without hedging or softening. The response came in within the hour, not officially, not through any formal channel. But Marcus forwarded her an email thread that had started in the company's internal messaging system, a thread that had begun with a project manager on the 7th floor named Teresa, who had written simply, "I've worked here for 9 years, and this is the first leadership communication I've ever read that sounded like a real person wrote it." The thread had 23 replies by 6 o'clock, and they all had the same general quality, the quality of people who have been waiting without quite knowing they were waiting for someone to speak to them directly. Emily read the thread twice. Then she closed her laptop and went home. The week that followed was in many respects the most demanding of her professional life, which was saying something for a woman who had spent 20 years quietly managing crises that other people did not know were happening. The difference was that now they were hers to manage openly. Her name was on the decisions. Her judgment was on record. There was no Nathan in front of her absorbing the visibility while she managed the substance from behind. It was exhausting, and it was clarifying in equal measure, and she had not expected the clarifying to be quite so immediate, quite so physical, the specific sensation of a person who has been compensating for a long time, suddenly standing without the compensation, and discovering that they are in fact perfectly capable of standing. Tuesday brought the first client meeting. Hargrove Financial had been with Whitmore Consulting for 11 years. Their CEO, a careful man named Douglas Hargrove, had built his relationship with the company primarily through Nathan Dinner's golf, the particular social architecture of a business friendship conducted on expensive occasions. He had requested the meeting within 48 hours of Nathan's suspension becoming public, and the tone of his request had been the tone of a man who is holding his loyalty in his hands and has not yet decided where to set it down. Emily met him in the conference room on the 12th floor. He came alone, which surprised her. She had expected his CFO, possibly his general counsel. The fact that he came alone told her something, that this was for Douglas a personal reckoning as much as a professional one, the kind of meeting a person has when they want to understand something rather than negotiate something. "I'll be direct," Douglas said when they had settled across from each other. "I've known Nathan for 11 years. I considered him a friend." "I know," Emily said. "I don't fully understand what happened." He looked at her steadily. "What I read in the press, what my lawyers have interpreted from what's been released, I understand the outline. But I've been in enough of these situations to know that the outline and the reality are rarely the same thing." "What would you like to know?" Emily said. He looked at her for a moment, assessing. She let him. "Why didn't you say something sooner about your role, about the contributions?" It was a real question. Not a challenge, not an accusation, a real question from a person who was genuinely trying to understand the architecture of what had happened. Because I believed in what we were building, Emily said, and because I was wrong about some things, about how much silence costs over time, about whether a person can build something real on a foundation that isn't acknowledged. She met his eyes. I'm not wrong about the company, Douglas. What we built here is solid. The strategy, the client relationships, the operational structure, all of it is sound. What wasn't sound was the story we were telling about it. Douglas was quiet for a moment. Then he said, My CFO thinks we should wait, see how the investigation resolves before we recommit. Your CFO is being prudent, Emily said. That's his job. And if I don't wait, then you're making a decision based on 11 years of results and a very clear-eyed look at who has been responsible for producing them. She said it plainly without the performance of confidence, just the statement itself, which was accurate and complete. I can't tell you what to decide. I can tell you that the company you partnered with is still here. Douglas picked up his coffee cup. He looked at it for a moment. Then he set it down and looked at Emily. My wife reads people better than anyone I've ever known, he said unexpectedly. I called her last night and told her what was happening, and she said something I've been thinking about since. He paused. She said that the person who does the real work and doesn't take the credit is always the safest person in the room when the one taking the credit falls. Emily did not say anything. She did not need to. Douglas stood up. I'll call my CFO, he said. Tell him to stand down. After he left, Emily sat alone in the conference room for 4 minutes before her next meeting. She counted them. She needed 4 minutes of nothing, no calculation, no strategy, no management of anyone's perceptions or expectations. Just 4 minutes of sitting in a room that was for the first time completely hers. Then her assistant knocked on the door and she said, come in, and she moved forward. By Thursday, 2 more clients had called with similar conversations that ended in similar places. A third called on Friday morning and did not require a meeting. They simply sent an email confirming their contract renewal through the following year with a note at the bottom that said, We look forward to working with you, Emily. We always trusted the work. Now we know where it came from. She read that note 3 times. The twist came on Friday afternoon. It came in the form of a phone call to Gerald from Collins, which Gerald relayed to Emily within minutes of receiving it. Nathan, it turned out, had been talking. Not to the press, not to clients, not in any way that created immediate legal exposure, but talking quietly to people in his network, to former colleagues and golf partners, and the particular ecosystem of professional relationships that a man builds over 20 years at the top of an industry. He had been telling them a story. The story was not overtly false. That was what made it complicated. It did not contradict the facts that had been made public. It simply framed them differently, framed Emily's emergence, not as the revelation of a long-suppressed truth, but as the calculated culmination of a long-planned campaign. In Nathan's version, Emily had been building this moment deliberately for years. In Nathan's version, the records, the attorney, the board members at the party, all of it had been orchestrated with a precision that made her look not like a wronged wife finally telling the truth, but like a strategist who had used her marriage as a long game. Emily listened to Gerald relay this without interrupting. When he finished, she said, How wide has it spread? 3 people that we know of have heard it. 2 of them are outside the company. One is Emily. One of them is Richard Cho. She closed her eyes. Richard called me this morning. Gerald said, his voice careful. He is not changing his position. He wanted me to know that, but he wanted you to be aware of the conversation. Emily opened her eyes. She looked at her desk. She thought about Nathan in a hotel room, exhausted and removed and stripped of everything he had defined himself by reaching for the only tool he had left, which was the story. The same instinct that had rewritten her contributions into background support for 20 years was now rewriting her testimony into manipulation. She should not have been surprised. She was not entirely surprised, but she felt it. She felt it the way you feel an old injury in cold weather. Not fresh pain, but the memory of pain living in the bone. What do you want to do? Gerald asked. Emily thought about it for exactly as long as it deserved. Nothing, she said. A pause. Nothing. The truth doesn't need management, Gerald. It just needs time. She picked up a pen and pulled the legal pad toward her. If Nathan wants to tell people that I planned this for 20 years, then he's also telling them that I spent 20 years building something worth fighting for. He's also telling them that the documentation is real. He's also telling them that every strategy on that screen was mine. She wrote a single word on the pad. He keeps trying to make me the villain of his story, and every time he does, he confirms the facts." Gerald was quiet for a moment. "That," he said finally, "is either the most sophisticated response I have ever heard or the most intuitive one." "Probably both," Emily said. She did not hear from Nathan directly that week. She heard about him through Gerald, through Marcus, through the particular osmosis of a professional community where news moves faster than formal channels. He had taken a meeting with a mid-sized firm in Portland. He had been seen at a restaurant with a venture capitalist whose name was familiar, but whose reputation was the kind that preceded him in rooms where reputation mattered. He was not destroyed. He was moving. He was doing what he had always done, which was find the next thing, the next angle, the next version of the story in which he was the protagonist. She found she could live with that. She found she could hold in the same hand the genuine anger of what he had done and the complex reality of who he was and always had been, imperfect and driven and limited in specific ways that had always been there but had not always mattered as much as they eventually did. She did not forgive him, but she stopped spending energy on him, and that felt in its own quiet way like a kind of freedom. The second twist came on a Saturday, which was not a work day, or should not have been, but was for Emily in those first weeks, because the work needed her, and she needed the work, and the two had always been in her life deeply and honestly intertwined. She was at home at the kitchen table with the legal pad and the laptop and a pot of coffee, when her phone rang with a number she recognized as Robert Whitmore's. She picked up on the second ring. "I hope I'm not interrupting," Robert said. "You're not." A pause. In the pause, she could hear something, not quite hesitation, but the particular quality of a man who has decided to say something and is finding the actual entry point for it. "I've been thinking," Robert said, "about what I should have done differently. 20 years ago, 10 years ago, 5 years ago, any of those years when it was clearer to me than I was willing to admit that something was wrong." "Robert, let me finish," he said, not harshly. "I protected my son when I should have held him accountable. I told myself it was loyalty. That's not what it was. It was avoidance. It's the same thing Nathan did with you. In a way, he told himself a story that let him avoid something difficult, and I did the same." He paused. "The company is where it is today, still standing, still capable of being something worth having because of what you did. Not me, not Nathan, you." Emily held the phone. "I know you know that," Robert said. "I just needed you to hear me say it." She did not trust her voice for a moment. She let the moment exist without filling it. Then she said, "Thank you, Robert." "I have one more thing," he said. "Okay. I'd like if you're willing to make a public statement, beyond the board record, something that goes to the press, something with my name on it in my own words that says clearly and permanently who built this company and what that person deserves." He paused. "I think the record matters. I think the world outside this boardroom deserves to hear it too." Emily pressed her fingers against the edge of the table, grounded herself with the physical sensation of something solid. "I'll have Gerald coordinate with you," she said. "Good." A pause. "Emily, for whatever it's worth, Nathan did love you. In whatever limited way he was capable of it, he loved you. I want you to know that I believe that." She thought about what Nathan had said on the phone, the real version of it, the honest one late at night in the hotel. "I think I forgot who you were." She thought about the man he had been before he became the man he had chosen to become. "I know," she said. "That's the part that makes it complicated." Robert made a sound that was almost a laugh. "Yes," he said. "That's usually where the complicated lives." They said goodbye. Emily set the phone down on the table. She looked at the legal pad in front of her. She looked at the notes she had been making before the call, client restructuring team assessments, the early architecture of a strategy for the company's next phase. Clean problems, solvable problems, the kind of problems that reward careful thinking and honest evaluation, and the particular kind of patience she had been developing her whole life without knowing exactly what she was developing it for. She picked up her pen. She went back to work. The following Tuesday brought the moment that changed the public story completely, the moment that in the weeks and months afterward, people who followed the Whitmore consulting situation would point to as the pivot, the thing that shifted the frame from corporate scandal to something more layered and more lasting. Robert Whitmore gave an interview. Hy gave it to the Business Journal, which was the same publication that had broken the story of Nathan's suspension, and he did not use a publicist or a communications consultant or any of the professional mediating infrastructure that executives typically employ when they want to control a narrative. He sat down with a journalist named Carol Tran, who was known for the specific quality of her questions, which were the kind that assumed intelligence on the part of the person being asked and respected them enough to ask the hard thing directly. Robert told the truth. He told it completely, and without the particular managerial caution that tends to empty a statement of its meaning. He said that Emily Carson Parker had been the strategic and financial foundation of Whitmore Consulting for 20 years. He said that he had known more than he had acted on and that he was accountable for that. He said that his son had inherited a company that Emily had helped save and had spent years misattributing its success. He said that the historical record had been corrected, and he intended to make sure the public record reflected the same correction. Carol Tran asked him one question toward the end of the interview that ran in the print version alongside the rest. She asked, "What do you think Emily Parker's story tells us?" Robert was quiet for a moment in the published transcript. Then he said, "It tells us that the person doing the real work is not always the person getting the credit. And it tells us that eventually, not always, not automatically, but eventually, the truth about who built something finds its way into the room." Emily put it there herself. "I just wish it hadn't taken so long for the rest of us to clear a path for her to do it." The interview was published on a Wednesday morning. Emily read it at her desk in Nathan's old office in the chair she had moved 6 inches to the left on her first day. She read it all the way through Carol Tran's questions and Robert's answers, and when she reached the end, she set her phone down and looked out the floor-to-ceiling window at the Seattle skyline, which was overcast and gray and entirely ordinary in the way that cities are on unremarkable Wednesday mornings. Marcus knocked on the open door. "The phones have been going since 6 a.m., he said. He was holding his tablet and wearing the expression of a man who is delivering news that is complicated to categorize. Interview requests, 3 business publications, 1 national newspaper, 2 podcast invitations, and he paused in a way that told her there was a final item he was building toward, a call from the Seattle Business Women's Council. They'd like to know if you'd consider being the keynote at their annual leadership conference in October. Emily looked at him. "Also," Marcus said, "there are 47 new emails since 8 this morning. I've sorted them by priority, and someone left flowers at the front desk for you." He paused. "There's no card, but Teresa from the 7th floor thinks they might be from one of the clients we met with last week." Emily thought about Douglas Hargrove's wife, who read people better than anyone he knew. She thought about 12 sentences. She thought about the chair 6 inches to the left, which was the right position, which had always been the right position. "Tell the council yes," she said. Marcus made a note. "And Marcus," she said as he turned to go. He stopped. "Good work on the internal letter," she said. "It did exactly what it needed to do. Thank you." Marcus looked at her for a moment with the particular expression of a person who has been thanked genuinely for work they did quietly without expectation of recognition. "Thank you for asking for the honest version," he said. He left. Emily turned back to the window. Outside, the city was doing what it always did, moving forward, indifferent and continuous, full of its own stories and its own complications, its own rooms where truth was waiting for someone to put it into the light. She had a 9 o'clock call with the company's largest institutional client in 40 minutes. She pulled the legal pad toward her and started her notes. The 9 o'clock call with Meridian Capital went 40 minutes longer than scheduled, which was, in Emily's experience, always a good sign. People who are ending a relationship do not stay on the phone for 40 extra minutes. People who are deciding to trust you do. Meridian's managing partner, a deliberate man named Howard Kessler, who had been in institutional investing for 30 years and who had the particular quality of stillness that belongs to people who have learned to let other people finish their sentences before forming opinions, had opened the call with a version of the same question Douglas Hargrove had asked in the conference room. He wanted to understand the shape of what had happened. Not the press version, not the board statement version, the actual shape, Emily told him. She told him the way she had learned to tell things over the past 3 weeks directly, without performance, without the managerial smoothing that tends to make a complicated story feel safe, but also feel hollow. She told him about the financial contributions and the strategic work. She told him about the documentation and the board. She did not editorialize about Nathan. She simply laid the facts in their correct order and let Howard Kessler do what 30 years of investment evaluation had trained him to do, which was assess. When she finished, Howard was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You're telling me that the strategy work underlying our engagement for the past 8 years was primarily yours?" "Primarily, yes," Emily said. "I can provide documentation if that's helpful." "I don't need documentation," Howard said. "The work speaks for itself. I've been in this long enough to recognize strategy that has coherence across years versus strategy that gets reinvented every quarter to look innovative." He paused. "Ours has coherence. That's what I needed to understand." They spent the remaining 40 minutes discussing the next phase of the engagement. Howard had 2 questions about market positioning that Emily answered from memory, pulling from the same long-view strategic thinking that had always been her natural habitat. By the end of the call, Howard had confirmed his firm's continued partnership and added a question about potentially expanding the scope of the engagement. Emily wrote the word expand on her legal pad and circled it twice. She had barely set the phone down when Claire called. Her daughter's voice had changed over the past 3 weeks in a way that Emily found both painful and quietly wonderful, changed in the way that young people's voices change when they are processing something large, when they are moving through the particular passage of discovering that the adults in their lives are human in ways they had not previously fully reckoned with. Claire was 17 and formidably intelligent and had always seen more than people expected a teenager to see. What she was processing now was not just her parents' marriage ending. It was the rewriting of a story she had grown up inside. "I read Grandpa Robert's interview," Claire said. "So did most of Seattle," Emily said. "Mom," there was something in her daughter's voice, not the careful tone of the first call after the birthday party, but something more direct, more unguarded. "Why didn't you ever tell me about what you did for the company, about all of it?" Emily thought about how to answer that honestly, without making it simple because Claire deserved honesty and she was old enough to receive a complicated version of it. "Because for most of the time I was doing it, I thought it was enough to do it," Emily said. "I thought the work was the point. And because this part is harder to say because talking about it would have required me to admit that something wasn't right. And I wasn't ready to do that for a long time." A silence on the line. "Are you angry at me?" Emily asked. "For not telling you?" Claire took a breath. "I'm angry that you had to be quiet for so long," she said. "That's different." Emily closed her eyes for a moment. "Yes," she said, "it is different. And you're right to make that distinction." "I told my friend Jess about it," Claire said. "She said her mom went through something kind of similar. Not the same, but the same feeling of being invisible inside something you built." She paused. "I think there are a lot of women like that." Emily thought about her mother, about the Carson family business and the brother who held the CEO title and the woman who ran the company from behind the CFO role, about the particular patience that had been passed down to her, the patience of a woman who knows the value of what she's doing, even when no one else does. "Yes," Emily said, "there are." "Well," Claire said, and there was something fierce and young and completely unambiguous in her voice. "I'm glad you stopped being quiet." Emily smiled. It was the first completely uncomplicated smile she had produced in 3 weeks, the smile of a woman who is proud of her daughter and cannot find a reason to hide it. "Come home this weekend," Emily said. "I'll make that pasta you like." "The one with the lemon. The one with the lemon." "Okay," Claire said. "Yeah, okay." After she hung up, Emily sat with the warmth of that call for exactly as long as she allowed herself, which was 2 minutes, and then she pulled the legal pad back and went to work. The investigation concluded its formal phase 6 weeks after Nathan's suspension. The findings, when this board presented them in their final summary, were neither more nor less than what Emily had known they would be. Nathan had engaged in substantive discussions with Blackbridge Technologies. He had offered information that was proprietary to Whitmore Consulting. The financial arrangement he had been negotiating for himself had been structured to obscure his involvement. None of it had been finalized before the birthday party. All of it had been real. The board's recommendation was removal, formal, permanent recorded removal, combined with a referral to the state bar for the legal ethics review of the communications implications and a financial settlement structure that clawed back a portion of the compensation Nathan had received during the period the communications had occurred. Collins filed an objection on Nathan's behalf. The board considered the objection. The board voted 4-1. Robert's vote this time was with the majority. Emily received a call from Gerald 10 minutes after the vote, sitting at her desk in the office that was no longer interim, hers but simply hers, the CEO title having been confirmed as permanent 2 weeks prior by a vote that was again unanimous. She had accepted the permanent role on a Thursday afternoon with the same steadiness she had brought to every consequential moment in the past 6 weeks, not without feeling, but with feeling that was fully under her own direction. "It's done," Gerald said. She did not say anything right away. "Emily." "I heard you," she said. "I'm just sitting with it for a second." "Take your time," Gerald said. There was no urgency in his voice, just the quiet regard of a man who understood that some moments required a second and were worth giving it. She sat with it. She thought about the birthday party. She thought about the envelope and the 50 people and Nathan's smile. She thought about the elevator ride after the first board meeting, her reflection in the polished steel door, the 10 minutes on the kitchen floor that she had never told anyone about. She thought about 20 years of work that now had her name on it permanently in the company's official record, in Robert's published interview, in the communications she had written, and the client calls she had taken, and the document of her own life that was finally accurate. "Okay," she said. "Thank you, Gerald." She set the phone down. Marcus appeared in the doorway 30 seconds later because Marcus had an instinct for timing that Emily had come to rely on. "The board wants to know if you have time for a brief call this afternoon." "Tell them 4 o'clock, Emily said, "and Marcus clear my calendar for the last hour of the day." He looked at her. "Everything okay?" "Everything is fine," she said. "I just want an hour." He nodded and went. The 4 o'clock call with the board was brief and substantive. Richard Cho walked through the formal documentation of Nathan's removal, confirmed the legal referral, and then spent the final 10 minutes of the call asking Emily about the strategic direction she was considering for the company's next phase. It was the first call she had taken with the board where the entire conversation had been forward-facing, not crisis management, not investigation updates, not the rearranging of a structure that had been compromised, but the actual work of building something. She had a lot to say. By the time the call ended and the last board member dropped off the line, it was 4:55. Emily held the phone in her hand for a moment after the call ended, feeling the specific quality of a conversation that had gone well. Not the performed confidence of a meeting where you are managing perception, but the genuine satisfaction of a conversation where you know what you're talking about and the people listening know it too. She put the phone down. She got up. She spent the last hour of the day doing something that was not strictly business. She walked the floors. She had not done it before, not in the weeks since taking on the interim role, because the weeks had been full and dense and relentless in the way of transition periods. But she had been thinking about it since the internal letter, since Teresa's email thread, and the 23 replies from people on floors. She had not yet stood on people who had been working inside the company she had helped build, without knowing her name. She took the stairs. She went to the 7th floor first, where Teresa was still at her desk at 5 o'clock, finishing something on her screen. Teresa looked up when Emily appeared in the bullpen and did a small, involuntary double-take that Emily had noticed herself doing sometimes in mirrors, the double-take of someone encountering a thing they know is real, but had not quite expected in front of them. "Miss Parker," Teresa said. "Emily," she said. "Please." Teresa blinked. "Emily, can I help you with something?" "I read your email," Emily said. "The one about the internal letter." Teresa's expression shifted, the particular expression of a person who has written something honestly and is now wondering if honesty was the right decision. "Oh," she said. "I hope that was okay." "It was more than okay," Emily said. "It told me something important. I wanted to thank you for it." Teresa looked at her for a moment, then said with the directness of a person who has been in an organization long enough to have lost patience for formality. 9 years I've worked here. 9 years. And the first time I've ever felt like leadership knew we existed down here was that letter." She paused. "So thank you for that. It mattered." Emily nodded. "It's supposed to matter. That's the point." She stayed on the 7th floor for 20 minutes. She talked to 4 other people, asked questions, listened to answers. She went to the 5th floor after that and the 9th, and by the time she made it back to the 14th, it was 6:15, and the building had thinned out to the evening skeleton crew and the particular hush of an office after hours. She felt the weight of the company differently after those floors. She felt it as human weight, the actual people whose work was the substance of everything that had been built and fought over and documented and defended. That was the thing that the boardroom version of this story sometimes obscured, she thought. The boardroom was where the decisions were made, but the floors were where the work actually lived. She went back to her office, picked up her jacket, and was almost to the elevator when her phone buzzed with a text from a number she did not immediately recognize. She read it. It was from Nathan. It said, "I heard about the vote today. I want you to know that I'm not fighting it. I think this is right. I don't know how to say anything else right now except that I think this is right." Emily stood in the corridor of the 14th floor and read the text twice. She thought about what to say. She thought about all the things she could say, the true things, the complicated things, the things that had been accumulating for 20 years and had partially been released at the birthday party, and partially in the boardroom, and partially in the quiet of her kitchen at 2 in the morning. She thought about whether this moment required any of them. She typed back, "I know, take care of yourself." She sent it. She put her phone in her pocket and got in the elevator. The twist that nobody saw coming arrived on a Tuesday, 8 weeks after the birthday party, and it did not come from a boardroom or an attorney or a press statement. It came from James. Her son called from Boston on a Tuesday evening at 8 o'clock, which was unusual because James was a Tuesday night study person who guarded his academic schedule with the same methodical intensity that Emily recognized as her own habits in a younger body. The fact that he was calling on a Tuesday meant he had something specific to say. "Mom," he said when she picked up, "I need to tell you something, and I need you to hear me out before you respond." Emily set down the glass of water she was holding. "Okay, I've been talking to Dad." She had expected this in the abstract, in the way you expect things that are inevitable but have not yet arrived. James was 20 years old and loved both his parents and was navigating a situation that was complicated in the specific way that family situations are always complicated. Not simple villain and victim, not clean edges, but the messy and real contours of actual people who had loved each other imperfectly for a long time. "How is he?" Emily said. She meant it simply. She asked because she was Claire and James's mother, and their father's state of being mattered to her for that reason, if not for any other. He's not great," James said with the particular honesty of a 20-year-old who does not yet have the sophistication to manage his truth before delivering it. "He's staying at a hotel still. He's been talking to a therapist, which honestly, Mom, that surprised me. Dad in therapy." It surprised Emily too, slightly. "He asked me to tell you something," James said. "He said he didn't know if he had the right to contact you directly about it, but he wanted you to know." Emily waited. "He's been going back through everything," James said. "The business stuff, the records. He had his financial people put together I don't know what you call it, an accounting of what was actually his and what was yours. Not for legal reasons, just for him, to actually see it." A pause. "He called me after they finished it, and he said, 'Mom,' he said he sat with it for 3 hours. And then he called me, and he said the number was larger than he thought. Your number, what you put in." Emily did not speak. "He wanted you to know," James said, "that he sees it. He said that's probably not enough, and he knows it's not enough, and he's not asking for anything. He wanted you to know that he did the math, and he sees it." The silence that followed was the kind that has texture, that has weight, that is not empty, but full of things that do not resolve easily into words. "Thank you for telling me," Emily said finally. "Are you okay?" James asked. "Yes," she said. "I'm okay." "Mom, are you proud of what you did? Not the divorce stuff, I mean. The company stuff. What you built." She thought about the question honestly, the way she thought about most things. "Yes," she said. "I am." "Good," James said. "You should be." After she hung up, Emily sat for a long time with the particular complicated fullness of what her son had told her. Nathan alone in a hotel room asking his financial team to reconstruct the actual record, the real arithmetic of 20 years, the numbers as they actually were, rather than as he had needed them to be. Nathan sitting with that accounting for 3 hours. Nathan picking up the phone to call his son because he needed finally to give the truth to someone, even if he could not yet give it directly to the person it belonged to. She did not cry. She had done her crying in the right moments, in the private moments in the kitchen, at 2 in the morning and in the shower, and once briefly in the parking garage after a particularly difficult client call, when the accumulated weight of everything had found its way out before she could redirect it. She had cried the honest tears in the right places without performance. What she felt now was different. It was the feeling of a story reaching its true shape, not the shape she had planned, not the shape Nathan had planned, but the shape that things take when truth has been fully released into a system and the system has had time to absorb it. It was not neat, it was not without pain, but it was real, and real was always what she had wanted. She went to bed at 10:30 and slept 8 hours, which was something she had not done since before the birthday party. She woke up to a text from Sandra Okafor that said, "When you're ready, let's have that dinner. No rush, but I meant what I said." She texted back, "Next week, your choice of restaurant." October came. The Seattle Business Women's Council Leadership Conference was held on a Friday at the Convention Center downtown, and Emily arrived early because she always arrived early and stood in the corridor outside the main hall for 4 minutes before she went in doing something that was not exactly composure management and not exactly prayer, but was somewhere between them, the quiet internal settling that a person does before they stand in front of a room and say something that matters. The room held 400 people. She had not spoken to a room of 400 people before, not with her own name on the program, not with her own story on the agenda. She had spoken in boardrooms and conference rooms, and across negotiating tables, and on phone calls, and in kitchens, and in the corridors of a building that now bore the weight of her decisions in its every floor. But 400 people, her name in the program, her story, as the text, this was different. The woman who introduced her. The council's chair, a warm and no-nonsense attorney named Patricia Suarez, used the accurate language. Not Nathan's wife, not the woman behind the scenes. She said founding strategic partner, 20 years of verifiable contribution, CEO of Whitmore Consulting. She said Emily's name the way it sounded when it was given its full weight and the room received it. Emily walked to the podium. She looked at 400 faces. She did not use notes. She had never used notes for anything that actually mattered to her because notes were for information you were not sure of, and she was completely sure of this. "I want to start," she said, "by telling you something that took me 20 years to say out loud." The room was very still. "I built something," as she said, "with my own hands, my own money, my own thinking over 20 years, and for most of those years I let someone else put their name on it. Not because I was weak, not because I didn't know what I was doing, but because I told myself a story about what mattered, and in that story, the work was the point. The credit wasn't." She paused. "I was wrong. Not about the work. The work was always the point. But credit is not vanity. Credit is the accurate record of what is true, and an inaccurate record over time costs more than you expect." She looked out at the room. "Some of you know this feeling," she said. "Some of you are living it right now today in this particular version of it, or some other version. You are doing work that is real and significant and that is being attributed elsewhere. And you are telling yourself that the work is enough, that doing it well is its own reward, that the person who knows what they've done doesn't need anyone else to say so." She let that sit for a moment. "I'm here to tell you that is a beautiful idea and an expensive one," she said, "because the record matters, the accurate record of what you built, what you contributed, what you made possible. That record is not just for you, it's for every person who comes after you. It's for your daughter who needs to see that the work women do is visible and permanent and real. It's for the next person in your seat who deserves to inherit an accurate history. It's for the field itself, which cannot grow in directions it doesn't know exist." She stopped. She looked at the room again. 400 faces, all different ages, all different contexts, all carrying some version of the particular knowledge she was speaking to. "I spent 20 years being quietly essential," she said. "I am done being quiet. I don't say that with anger. I say it with clarity. Those are different things. Anger looks backward. Clarity looks at what's in front of you and decides what to do with it." She talked for 40 minutes. She talked about the practical things, documentation attribution, the specific habits of professional self-advocacy that sound simple and are harder than they sound. She talked about the difference between humility and erasure, and why conflating them is a mistake that compounds over time. She talked about her mother, who had run a company from a CFO title, and who had kept records, and who had given Emily the tools she had needed, even though neither of them had known at the time what the tools were for. At the end, she said this: "On the night of my 42nd birthday, my husband handed me divorce papers in front of 50 people and told the room that he had sacrificed his happiness for me for 20 years. He believed that. I want to be clear about that. He genuinely believed the story he was telling. Because when you take credit for something long enough, the false record becomes your memory. And when your memory is false, you start to make decisions based on fiction." She paused. The truth, when it finally came into that room, didn't come in angry. It came in documented. It came in with a lawyer and a screen full of evidence and 20 years of accurate records. And it changed everything. She looked out at 400 faces. Keep your records. Tell the truth about your work. Not because revenge is the goal, it isn't, and it shouldn't be, but because the truth clearly stated is the most powerful thing you will ever bring into a room. The applause started before she finished the last sentence. She did not rush off the stage when it ended. She stood at the podium for a moment and let herself receive it fully, without the deflecting instinct she had spent 20 years developing, without the automatic redirection towards someone else's contribution or some qualifying caveat. She had earned this room. She let herself be in it. Patricia Suarez shook her hand backstage with both of hers. "I want to invite you back next year," Patricia said immediately. "Same room, more time." "Ask me in the spring," Emily said. "I'll know better than what I have to say." She took the elevator down to the lobby and walked outside into a Seattle October afternoon, cool and bright, the kind of day that feels like a fresh document, unmarked, full of potential. Diane was waiting outside, which Emily had not expected, and which made her stop for a moment on the sidewalk. Diane held out a coffee. "I watched the live stream from the lobby," she said. "I wasn't going to miss it." Emily took the coffee. They walked. They had walked together in this city for 20 years, through the ordinary occasions and the extraordinary ones, through celebrations and losses, and the many complicated middles of a long friendship. They walked now without a particular destination through the downtown blocks in the October light, and Diane did not ask how it had gone, because she had seen how it went, and Emily did not perform any version of modesty or exhaustion, because she was with the one person in front of whom she had never needed to perform anything. "Claire called me after she talked to you Sunday," Diane said after a while. "I know," Emily said. "She told me she was going to. She said she's proud of you." "She told me that too." "James texted me too, actually. He said—" Diane stopped. Emily looked at her. "He said, tell her she doesn't have to be quiet anymore," Diane said. Emily looked ahead. The street was ordinary, and the afternoon light was ordinary, and the coffee was the right temperature, and the city was doing what it always did. "He's right," she said. "I don't." 4 months after this birthday party, the formal divorce settlement was signed. It was by every legal measure equitable, a word that Emily had always preferred to the word fair, because fair implied that two sides of a scale were being balanced, while equitable implied that accuracy had been restored. What she had put in and what she received in return were for the first time in 20 years in proper proportion. Nathan signed without contesting the final terms. Gerald told her on a Friday afternoon, and she thanked him, and she hung up, and she went back to the strategy document she was building for the company's next fiscal year. The document was one of the best pieces of work she had produced in her professional life, and she knew it, and she had put her name on every page. 6 months after the birthday party, Whitmore Consulting posted its strongest quarterly results in the company's history. The press covered it. Several of them noted in the same piece that the company's performance had stabilized and grown under Emily Parker's leadership during one of the most publicly turbulent periods in its history. The Business Journal ran a profile of her. Carol Tran, who had interviewed Robert, wrote it. It was 4,000 words and used Emily's name in the headline and described her in the opening paragraph as the architect of a 20-year strategy that had made a company worth having. Emily read it once on a Saturday morning at the kitchen table, where she had read so many documents over so many years. She thought it was accurate. She thought Carol Tran asked good questions. She thought the photograph they ran Emily at her desk, looking at something off camera, her expression, the expression of a person in the middle of thinking, rather than the performed stillness of a formal portrait, was the truest photograph of herself she had ever seen published anywhere. She clipped it. Not from sentiment exactly. From the same instinct her mother had taught her, the instinct that said, the accurate record deserves to be kept. She put it in a folder. She went back to work. Nathan, by the time the profile ran, had taken a senior advisory role at a smaller firm, not Blackbridge, which had quietly withdrawn from that conversation once the full scope of the communications became public, but a legitimate operation with a limited mandate and a scope that matched more honestly what Nathan was actually capable of contributing when he was not borrowing from someone else's account. It was not a restoration of what he had lost, but it was real. And real, Emily had always believed, was always better than the performance of something larger. He sent her a text when the profile ran. It said, "I read it. It's accurate. Congratulations, Emily." She did not respond immediately. She thought about it for a day. Then she typed back, "Thank you. I hope you're well." She sent it. She did not wait for his reply. She was already at her next thought, her next document, her next problem that rewarded careful thinking and accurate records, and the particular kind of patience that her mother had built into her, and that she had spent 20 years developing without knowing exactly what she was developing it for. She knew now. She was developing it for this, for the room, for the floor, for the work, for the record, for the long and continuing project of building something real and putting her name on it and standing in the truth of what she had done. Not quietly, not in the background, not behind someone else's story, but clearly and permanently and completely in her own voice. Emily Parker had spent 20 years being the most important person in a room that gave her no credit. She had walked out of that room with the truth in her hands, and she had never once looked back.